Bitcoin has kicked off this bull cycle with a bang and has outperformed almost all other assets. However, many investors are now looking to try and capture even greater gains, with a lot of anticipation for a potential alt season. So here we're going to look at whether we can expect to see Bitcoin begin to lose some of its dominance. Today we're going to be looking at whether Bitcoin is going to continue to outperform, and where better to start than the Bitcoin versus Ethereum ratio chart we have here on lookintobitcoin.com, where we can see over the past year Ethereum's purchasing power compared to Bitcoin is down minus 24%, which basically means if you were to buy US dollars rather than use US dollars to buy Bitcoin or whatever fiat currency you like, your purchasing power with Ethereum compared to Bitcoin has decreased by nearly a quarter. So Bitcoin has massively outperformed Ethereum in its upside gains this cycle. And this is true not for the entire history of ETH, because of course it started at practically nothing, but it hasn't set a new all-time high since June 2017. Since then, it's just been lower peaks and lower peaks. And even in the latest bull cycle in 2021, it didn't even reach the highs it reached in 2018. So this doesn't really give too much potential for any long-term outperformance of pretty much any other digital assets. But on a short-term horizon, there is always the potential for some of these more speculative, smaller market cap, more volatile assets to potentially outperform BTC. But is now the time to start considering these? Well, if we go to the Bitcoin dominance chart that we have here, we can see that Bitcoin dominance pretty much since the Bitcoin bottom has just been continuing to increase. Might look a little bit crowded. So the blue line is the Bitcoin dominance, which we can see bottomed out at around 39% and now sits at around 54, nearly 55%. And the Bitcoin price, which of course increased from around 16,000 to now where we are, as I film this, above $70,000. And like I said, as Bitcoin has increased, Bitcoin dominance has increased, which means practically every other digital asset has underperformed the percentile gains we've seen in BTC. But this isn't always the case. This is where people start looking at these more speculative, more risk-on, more volatile assets for this alt season. That, in fairness, we do typically see that lasts not for too long, a couple months maybe, at some point in each bull cycle. So if I just hide the BTC price again, we can see once this is rapidly decreasing, it indicates that Bitcoin's dominance of the entire crypto market cap is decreasing. So we can see right now that the entire crypto market cap is worth a couple $1 trillion-ish, I think. We can see that Bitcoin makes up 54% of that. Whereas if the total crypto market cap was to remain $2 trillion and Bitcoin's market cap was to decrease to around $1 trillion, then dominance would decrease to 50%, if that makes sense. Basically, when this is decreasing, other crypto assets are outperforming Bitcoin, and once this is increasing, Bitcoin is outperforming pretty much everything else. And we can see these usually have very quick, rapid decreases in dominance that lasts, like we said, only a few months. And typically we see this long grind up in dominance for a vast majority of each cycle. Again, if I just load up the Bitcoin price here, in fact, I'll just make that logarithmic so it's a bit easier to see. What we can see is if we take the previous two bull cycles, for example, we see this increase in Bitcoin's price action, and only in the latter stages of the bull cycle do we see this dominance really start to decrease. It's even more apparent in the latest cycle we had, where Bitcoin's price bottomed out down here. Again, I'll just change the color of that so it's a bit easier to see. And then as Bitcoin's price increased throughout pretty much all of the bull market, we saw dominance continue to increase alongside it until Bitcoin had a bit of a retracement, regained that all-time high. We saw dominance very quickly dip. And a few other, like we said, speculative altcoins outperform for a very brief, short period of time. And it looks like we're doing something very similar here, where Bitcoin's price bottomed out and they're both increasing in parallel to potentially get to a point where maybe as Bitcoin tops out 6 months, 12 months, 18 months from now, and we see maybe other altcoins have some capital flow from Bitcoin into these smaller, more volatile assets as people look to try and just maximize and squeeze out every percentage of gains they can from the cycle. But again, if I just hide this, we can see that this dominance doesn't necessarily look like it's beginning to turn over. It looks like the trend is very much still to the upside. And like we could see, as Bitcoin is continuing to climb higher, I can't see this trend changing anytime soon, to be honest. If we just go to a slightly higher time frame chart, we can see here that Bitcoin usually has these big upside moves in dominance. And we can actually map this out with support and resistance to see big key turning points, such as here, which is actually where we most recently topped out before we had a little bit of a pullback in the dominance, as well as potentially up here, which I think many people are watching the 60% dominance area for maybe Bitcoin to come back up, reach this area, and maybe come down and start this alt season. But we could potentially go even higher. A thing to consider is, unlike previous cycles, we now have institutional capital inflows. And once Bitcoin again reclaims previous all-time highs, sets new all-time highs, and this institutional capital is flowing in, there's not really many accessible means to put large amounts of capital in these smaller market cap plays. Really, all these big players are going to be putting it into the safest, most reliable, longest serving, best performing asset, which they can very easily do through these ETFs, which is Bitcoin. There is, of course, always the opportunity, if we see this cycle extending deep into 2025, that we see this dominance increase to potentially even the 70% level, which would absolutely annihilate pretty much all alts purchasing power versus BTC. But how can we maybe predict a little better? Because, of course, just kind of speculating and forecasting what could happen based on if, buts, and maybes is somewhat useful, but it doesn't give us any concrete yes, no, definitive answers. What we can actually do is look at something like the rate of change of a slightly different chart. So if I just remove these drawings, turn this back into a line, the Bitcoin dominance, and I'll add this line on, which is the ETH versus BTC ratio. So it's very similar to what is being displayed on this chart here on Looking to Bitcoin. But here we can just see it on TradingView, and we can see that the purchasing power of Ethereum versus BTC has decreased substantially over the last few years. But typically, as capital flows in the cryptocurrency markets, it usually starts at Bitcoin or maybe stable coins, and then, like we said, flows into these smaller and smaller market cap plays as people get greedier and greedier, and the market gets closer and closer to the cycle ending. We can see that ETH BTC is a very good indicator of when maybe a decent point to potentially put very small portions of your capital into other digital assets if that's what you would like to do. And the way we can almost gauge whether now is a good time to do so is by looking at the rate of change. So this is the 90-day rate of change of the ETH BTC, this pink line we're seeing here. And once we see a positive 3-month or 90-day change in Ethereum versus BTC, usually we have these short-lived periods of dominance decreasing and altcoins beginning to, like we said, for a very short period of time, outperform. So for example, we could see down here, once we had this big increase in the ETH BTC rate of change, which we can see very clearly on the chart here, is when dominance was dropping massively. So again, this was a pretty decent area to potentially load up on some altcoins if that's what you want to do. If we zoom out again here, we can see probably the clearest example in the previous bull cycle. Once we see this increase above this zero line here, got the wrong tool. Here we can see it come up and stay positive all the way until here. And during that time, we saw ETH actually increase pretty massively all the way up here, and dominance at the exact same time decreased absolutely massively. And then you'd have exited your Ethereum into BTC, into safe haven assets, right around this area as Bitcoin dominance begins to massively climb. Now, I don't really hold any altcoins at all, especially not for an extended period of time. And I think the clearest way to show this is to just go into something like CoinMarketCap so we can actually see the data behind how unlikely it is to pick a winner compared to BTC. So here I've just got all cryptocurrencies listed by market cap. But if I change it to 90-day percentage change, so this is how much it has increased or decreased over the past 3 months, we can see that there are some very small speculative coins that have outperformed BTC. But we don't have to scroll too far to actually find that Bitcoin has performed better than pretty much everything else. In fact, there's only been 31 different assets over the past 90 days that have performed better than BTC. And I know you may be thinking to yourself, well, these sound great. Why didn't I buy any of these 31 assets? It must be easy, right? Well, there's 10,000 assets here on CoinMarketCap, which means you had a 0.3% chance of picking one of those that outperformed BTC out of all of the countless rug pulls and just absolutely nonsense tokens that pumped 1,000% and dumped 95% the next day. And also keep in mind, a vast majority of these are very small market cap. So you could actually be buying these, have some slippage, have an impact on the market, not have the exit liquidity to get rid of your position. And if we go back to some historical screenshots, we can see that a lot of these really don't last. If we look at a snapshot of 2020 when the previous halving event occurred, we just had our most recent halving about a month ago. But here, the previous one in 2020, we could see there's some familiar sites, but Bitcoin Satoshi Vision, if you remember that, we can go down here and see that there's a lot of coins that don't really exist today, definitely haven't sustained their performance. But if we go back to 2016, it becomes even more apparent where we're getting coins that have just vanished from the space, that no longer exist. Pretty much all of these now, if you try to find them, if you try to buy them, they're just gone. And this is only 2 halvings ago. In the next couple of years, there's going to be new projects coming out, old projects that are just evaporated from the network. And really, the chances of finding anything that outperforms BTC on a longer time frame basis is pretty much zero. Nothing has done it so far. There's no indication that anything is going to do it. And especially as we're seeing the illiquidity of Bitcoin, the supply and demand economics continue to work in Bitcoin's favor. If we just go to something like the hodl waves chart, we can actually see that the amount of BTC in circulation, especially after this most recent halving event, is just continuing to decrease. And again, this works so much in Bitcoin's favor, especially with the new ETFs, especially with the fact that all of these altcoins can just be created and printed to trillions in circulating supply. We know the economics, we know the supply and demand of BTC, and it's all very much pointing towards Bitcoin continuing to outperform on a very long-term basis, almost with certainty. But like we said, if you are looking to maybe take some smaller, more speculative plays on some volatile assets, look at this Bitcoin price live page here. Wait until the Bitcoin versus Ethereum 3-month percentage change becomes positive, and only at that point take very tiny positions to maybe try and get some lucky roulette plays. Also, if you haven't already, please don't forget to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications to ensure you're receiving all of our content as soon as it's released. And make sure to check out all the resources we've discussed today, as well as the many more that are all available on lookintobitcoin.com, your number one source for Bitcoin information. So just to summarize, many traders and investors have begun exploring alternative digital assets in an attempt to try and outperform Bitcoin's gains. And while there are, of course, short-term exceptions to this and outliers that will, for a brief period, outperform BTC, a vast majority of these have massively underperformed Bitcoin for a prolonged period of time. We could look at the 90-day percentage performance and see that 0.31%-ish of those assets listed on CoinMarketCap have actually outperformed BTC, which is pretty much impossible to predict. And no cryptocurrency has outperformed BTC on a multi-cycle basis. We could see by the historical snapshots that nothing really comes close to outperforming BTC. Nothing acts as the store of value and peer-to-peer electronic currency like Bitcoin does. And especially now with the market dynamics of an ever-increasing illiquid supply, institutional inflows, really, there's no reason for us to maybe think that this trend is going to change. At least for the time being, it looks like the Bitcoin dominance is going to continue increasing as Bitcoin continues to outperform. If you liked this video, then please visit lookintobitcoin.com, where you can consider becoming a site subscriber to gain access to professional resolution charts, advanced macro and portfolio data tools, in-depth crypto industry reports, live and personalized indicator alerts, private TradingView scripts, and more, all for a fraction of the standard industry price. And let me know in the comments below and on social media, are there any altcoins you're looking at? I know we are looking to Bitcoin, but we can acknowledge that there are other digital assets that interest people, even though we definitely suggest going almost entirely into BTC. As I said, let me know in the comments below and on social media. I look forward to reading and replying to all of them. Thank you all very much for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.